Welcome to the History AI Podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Welcome back to the History AI Podcast, the show where the past is never dusty, never boring, and usually wearing a hat with a feather in it.
Sometimes holding a musket.
Sometimes holding a musket.
Sometimes standing next to a cannon and saying, "Don't worry, I've got this."
Which is actually a pretty perfect way to introduce today's episode, because we are talking about Dominique Youx, one of those larger-than-life figures from early New Orleans history who somehow manages to be a privateer, a pirate, a soldier, a political figure, and a local legend all at once.
He is one of those guys where history looks at him and says, "Please pick a lane." And Dominique says, "No."
Before we get into cannon fire, smuggling, Jean Lafitte, and the Battle of New Orleans, we want to ask you to subscribe to the History AI Podcast wherever you're listening, and please leave us a 5-star review.
5 stars, not 4 stars, and a thoughtful comment about how Chuck mispronounces French names.
I'm doing my best.
The 5-star review really helps the podcast grow. It helps more people find the show. It tells the algorithm, hey, these two history nerds are worth your time. And it keeps us sailing smoothly through the strange waters of the past.
Also, remember that all of our episodes are evergreen. That means you can listen today, tomorrow, next year, or while hiding from customs agents in a Louisiana bayou, and the stories will still hold up.
And yes, new merchandise is available now. Check the link in the show notes. We have gear for history fans, podcast fans, and anyone who wants to look like they know more about the War of 1812 than their friends. Also, stay tuned after the episode for the original song, The Pirate of Barataria Bay.
And you can always suggest topics through social media. We love hearing what you want us to cover.
Today's topic came from exactly the kind of history rabbit hole we love. Dominique Youx is not as famous as Jean Lafitte, but once you start digging into his story, you realize he's right there in the smoke and mud and confusion of one of America's most dramatic military moments.
So Marco, let's set the stage. Who was Dominique Youx?
Dominique Youx was a French-born privateer and soldier who became closely associated with the Lafitte brothers and the Baratarian smugglers operating around Louisiana in the early 1800s. And right away, we have to say his life is wrapped in legend. Even his name has variations. You'll see Dominique Youx, sometimes references to him under other names. That happens a lot with figures who lived in the world of ports, privateering, shifting loyalties, and unofficial business.
Unofficial business is a very polite way to say piracy adjacent.
Exactly. He operated in that grey zone between pirate and privateer. A pirate is basically stealing at sea for personal gain. A privateer is doing something very similar, but with paperwork from a government.
So piracy with a permission slip.
That's the basic idea. A letter of marque gave private ships permission to attack enemy vessels during wartime. But in practice, the line could get blurry, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, especially during the chaos of the Napoleonic era and the wars between European empires, and especially when the people doing the attacking were also deeply involved in smuggling.
Dominique Youx was probably born in France, often tied to the Mediterranean port city of Sète, which matters because a place like that would have exposed him early to ships, sailors, trade, military traffic, and the culture of the sea.
And that maritime background helps explain how he ends up in the Caribbean and Louisiana. There are accounts connecting him to French military service, including artillery experience, and that becomes very important later. Because when Dominique Youx enters the famous part of the story, he is not just some guy with a sword and dramatic facial hair. He knows guns, big guns, cannons.
That detail is huge, because history sometimes reduces these men to pirates, which makes them sound like cartoon villains with parrots. But the Baratarians had real skills. They knew waterways. They understood ships. They could move goods, men, and information through the Gulf and the bayous. And some of them, like Dominique Youx, were experienced artillerymen.
And New Orleans needed exactly those skills.
But before New Orleans needs him, New Orleans is very annoyed by him.
Deeply annoyed.
Let's talk about Barataria.
Barataria was the center of Jean Lafitte's smuggling network. It was not a single pirate cave with a skull sign out front, although honestly, that would be convenient for storytelling. It was a network of bays, islands, channels, and settlements south of New Orleans, especially around Barataria Bay and Grande Terre. The area was difficult to navigate if you didn't know it. But if you did know it, it was perfect for moving goods outside official channels.
And New Orleans at this time was a wild place economically and politically. The Louisiana Purchase had only happened in 1803. The United States had suddenly acquired this enormous territory from France, and New Orleans was now an American city, but culturally, it was still deeply French, Spanish, Caribbean, Creole, and international.
It was one of the great crossroads of North America. Ships came in from the Caribbean, Europe, the Atlantic coast, and the interior via the Mississippi River. And whenever you have a major port, high demand for goods, complicated laws, taxes, embargoes, and weak enforcement, you create opportunity.
Opportunity for merchants.
Opportunity for smugglers.
Opportunity for people who say, technically officer.
And Dominique Youx was one of the men who thrived in that world. He became associated with Jean and Pierre Lafitte, who ran an impressive and illegal operation. They brought in goods, including captured goods, and sold them through networks that reached into New Orleans society.
Which is one of the funnier tensions in this story. The authorities condemned smuggling, but a lot of respectable people were buying smuggled goods.
Yes, everyone publicly says this is outrageous, then privately says, how much for the coffee?
Or cloth, or household items, or luxury goods. The Lafitte operation was not just a bunch of sea robbers burying treasure. It was an alternative supply chain.
A very illegal alternative supply chain.
But efficient.
Annoyingly efficient.
So Dominique Youx becomes one of the important Baratarian captains. He had a reputation for courage and skill. He was sometimes described as bold, daring, and dangerous. And that reputation eventually drew attention from American authorities.
Governor William C. Claiborne wanted to crack down on the Baratarians. From his perspective, they were criminals undermining American law and sovereignty in Louisiana. The United States was still trying to establish control over this new territory. You can't have a smuggling empire operating in the wetlands and embarrassing the government.
You also can't have a group of armed privateers who may or may not decide which country they feel loyal to that week.
Exactly. And the timing gets even more tense because the War of 1812 is underway. Britain and the United States are fighting. The Gulf Coast becomes strategically important. The British are looking for ways to attack New Orleans, and New Orleans is the key to the Mississippi River.
Whoever controls New Orleans controls the doorway to the American interior.
And this is where Jean Lafitte and his men suddenly become very interesting to both sides.
The British knew the Baratarians had ships, local knowledge, and fighting men. They also knew these guys were not exactly best friends with the American authorities. So the British tried to recruit Lafitte,
which was a smart move. From a British perspective, imagine being able to land with local guides who know the bayous and channels. Imagine having smugglers who can move you toward New Orleans. That would be a massive advantage.
But Lafitte does something interesting. Instead of taking the British offer, he warns the Americans.
And that decision is one of the reasons the Baratarians become part of American legend. Lafitte offers his services to the United States. He basically says, yes, we have had some legal misunderstandings, but perhaps we can help defend New Orleans.
Legal misunderstandings, meaning arrest warrants.
Several.
Now here's the twist. Before that alliance really comes together, American forces attack the Baratarian base at Grande Terre in September 1814.
Right? Commodore Daniel Patterson leads a raid against the Baratarians. Dominique Youx was among the Baratarian leaders connected to the defense or command structure there. The Americans captured ships, goods, and men. The raid disrupted the smuggling operation, and some of the Baratarians ended up imprisoned in New Orleans,
including Dominique Youx,
which creates one of the strangest transitions in American military history. 1 minute, Dominique Youx is a captured pirate or privateer sitting in trouble with the law. The next, the city desperately needs men who can fight, shoot, and understand the terrain.
Because the British are coming.
And not in a small way. The British campaign against New Orleans was serious. This was not a symbolic raid. Britain had already burned Washington, D.C. in 1814. New Orleans was a major prize. If the British captured it, they could threaten American control of the Mississippi and reshape negotiations and power in the region.
Enter Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson arrives to defend New Orleans with a mixed force that sounds almost impossible on paper. Regular U.S. troops, state militia, free men of color, Choctaw fighters, local volunteers, Tennessee and Kentucky riflemen, sailors, Marines, and then, incredibly, Baratarians.
It's like if you made a war movie and the casting director just said, everyone. Bring everyone.
And the Baratarians were valuable because they knew artillery and they had combat experience. Dominique Youx and Renato Beluche are often remembered as commanders of Baratarian artillery detachments. These men could handle cannons under pressure, and that mattered enormously at Chalmette.
Chalmette is where the main battle happens on January 8, 1815. The American defensive line was built along the Rodriguez Canal, south of New Orleans. Jackson's men prepared earthworks, placed artillery, and waited for the British assault.
And the British army that attacked was experienced. These were not amateurs. Many had fought in the Napoleonic Wars. They were disciplined, battle-tested troops, but they were marching into a nightmare. Open ground, mud, confusion, delays, and an American defensive line bristling with guns.
Dominique Youx' role was not decorative. The Baratarian gunners helped serve the artillery that tore into the British advance. Cannon fire was devastating in that environment. The British had to cross exposed terrain under heavy fire, and the American line held.
The result was a stunning American victory. The British suffered terrible casualties. Major General Edward Pakenham, the British commander, was killed. The battle became one of the great moments in early American national memory, even though the Treaty of Ghent had already been signed in Europe before the battle took place.
That's always the detail that makes people pause. The war was technically on its way to being over, but word traveled slowly. So the Battle of New Orleans became this huge final victory that shaped American pride and Andrew Jackson's career.
And it reshaped the reputations of the Baratarians. Men who had been wanted as pirates became defenders of New Orleans. Dominique Youx, in particular, earned praise for his courage and skill.
There is a famous line often attributed to Andrew Jackson, something along the lines of, "If I were ordered to storm the gates of hell with Dominique Youx as my lieutenant, I would have no misgivings."
It's one of those quotes historians treat carefully because it is repeated a lot in legend and local memory. But whether Jackson said it exactly that way or not, the point is clear. Dominique Youx became remembered as a man Jackson admired.
And you can see why the quote stuck. It's cinematic.
Extremely cinematic.
You can almost hear the trailer voice. One pirate, one general, one gate of hell.
I would watch that.
Same.
After the battle, the legal situation changed dramatically. President James Madison issued pardons to many of the Baratarians who had helped defend New Orleans. Their wartime service gave them a path back into society. Dominique Youx went from outlaw to veteran hero.
And that transformation is one of the most interesting parts of his life, because he does not just disappear into the swamp. He settles in New Orleans.
He becomes part of the city's civic life. He is associated with politics, particularly as a supporter of Andrew Jackson. Some accounts connect him to service on the New Orleans City Council or local political activity. Again, with Dominique Youx, some details are clearer than others, but the broad arc is remarkable. French soldier, privateer, Baratarian smuggler, prisoner, artillery hero, citizen.
That is a resume.
It is not a resume you submit to a bank.
Unless the bank is in Barataria.
Fair.
What I find fascinating is how Dominique Youx forces us to think about reputation. If the British had captured New Orleans, he might be remembered, if at all, as a criminal who chose the wrong side. If the Americans had not needed his artillery skill, he might have remained just another smuggler in the court records. But because his abilities lined up with a moment of crisis, he became useful. And because he became useful, he became heroic.
That's such a good point. History is full of people who live in morally complicated spaces. Dominique Youx was not a saint. The Baratarian world was tied to smuggling, violence, and illegal trade. And we should not romanticize all of that away just because pirates are fun.
Pirates are fun in Halloween stores. Less fun when they are attacking commerce.
Exactly. But we also have to understand the world he lived in. The Gulf of Mexico in the early 19th century was a messy, contested place. Empires were weakening and fighting. Spain's power was under pressure. France had lost and sold Louisiana. The United States was expanding, but still trying to enforce authority. Revolutions had transformed the Caribbean. Trade laws changed, wars disrupted shipping, and men like Dominique Youx moved through that chaos.
He was a product of an unstable Atlantic world.
And New Orleans was the perfect stage for that. It was American, but not simply American. It was French, Spanish, Caribbean, African, Creole, and frontier all at once. The city's identity was layered, so Dominique Youx, with his French background, maritime career, military experience, and questionable legality, fit right into the contradictions of the place.
Let's talk a little about the privateer versus pirate distinction again, because Dominique Youx gets called both.
The distinction depends on law, recognition, and perspective. If you captured enemy ships under a valid commission during wartime, you could be considered a privateer. But if you attacked ships without proper authorization, or kept doing it outside the limits of that authorization, or targeted nations you were not legally allowed to target, you could be branded a pirate.
So the same person could look like a privateer to one government and a pirate to another.
Absolutely. And in a place like Barataria, legality was flexible in practice. The Lafitte network dealt in goods captured from Spanish ships and sold outside normal customs systems. To local buyers, this could mean cheaper goods. To officials, it was smuggling and piracy. To the people running it, it was business.
Dangerous business.
Very dangerous business. Dominique Youx' skill set came from that danger. He understood ships, guns, men, and pressure. Those are not skills you learn in a quiet office.
Unless it is a very intense office.
With cannons.
My dream office.
Same.
One of the things I love about this story is that Dominique Youx is not the headline name. Most people know Jean Lafitte, if they know anyone from this world. Lafitte gets the Pirate King treatment. But when the cannon smoke starts drifting across Chalmette, Dominique Youx becomes essential.
And that is how history often works. The famous name gets the statue in everyone's imagination, but the actual event depends on a network of capable people. Lafitte matters, of course. His decision to side with the Americans matters. But Youx and Beluche and the other Baratarian gunners were the ones serving artillery under battlefield conditions.
And artillery was central to the American defense. Jackson's line was positioned to make the British approach extremely costly. The cannon fire, combined with musket and rifle fire, turned the attack into a disaster for the British.
Dominique Youx' experience would have been especially valuable because artillery required more than bravery. It required timing, coordination, knowledge of powder, shot, elevation, range, and crew discipline. A cannon is not just a big tube that goes boom.
That is exactly how I would describe a cannon.
Which is why you would not be in charge of battery number 3.
Fair.
A trained gun crew had to load, aim, fire, clean, and reload under pressure, all while enemy fire was coming in. Mistakes could kill your own crew. Skilled artillerymen were incredibly important.
So when people say the pirates helped win the Battle of New Orleans, it's not just folklore. Their contribution was practical. They filled a real military need.
Yes, and the American command recognized it. The Baratarians were praised after the battle, and the pardons helped fold them into the victory narrative.
Let's move toward the end of Dominique Youx' life, because this is where the story gets surprisingly poignant.
Dominique Youx died in New Orleans in 1830. Accounts describe him as having died in poverty or near poverty. That contrast is striking. Here is a man who had lived by the sea, fought in one of the most famous battles in American history, earned public admiration, and yet he did not end his life as some wealthy pirate lord surrounded by treasure chests.
Which is another reminder that the pirate treasure image is mostly myth. A lot of these men lived hard lives and died with very little.
But New Orleans remembered him. The city honored him with a military funeral at public expense. That says a lot. Whatever his past, by the time of his death, Dominique Youx had become part of the city's heroic memory.
And he is buried in New Orleans, with Masonic symbolism associated with his grave. That also fits the world he inhabited, because fraternal networks, military networks, political networks, and port city relationships all overlapped in early 19th century New Orleans.
Dominique Youx' memory continues in local culture too. His name appears in Mardi Gras and pirate-themed traditions. and he remains one of those figures New Orleans loves. Complicated, dramatic, slightly dangerous, and impossible to reduce to one label.
New Orleans does not do boring historical figures.
It really does not.
So what is Dominique Youx' legacy?
I think his legacy is that he represents the messy making of America on the Gulf Coast. The textbook version of history often wants clean categories: patriot, pirate, soldier, criminal, hero. Dominique Youx walks right through all of those categories and refuses to stay put.
He also shows that the Battle of New Orleans was not won by one type of American. It was won by a coalition. Regular soldiers, militia, free men of color, native allies, sailors, Marines, local volunteers, and yes, former outlaws. That diversity of experience matters.
And Dominique Youx' story reminds us that skill can change a person's fate. His knowledge of artillery helped transform him from prisoner to patriot. Not because his past vanished, but because the city needed what he knew how to do.
That's the human part of the story. People are rarely just one thing. Dominique Youx was not simply a pirate, and he was not simply a hero. He was a man shaped by war, empire, opportunity, danger, and survival.
And maybe that's why he remains memorable. Not because he fits neatly into a moral box, but because he doesn't.
Also because Storm the Gates of Hell with Dominique Youx is an all-time line.
Again, careful with the exact quote.
I said it was an all-time line, not an all-time notarized deposition.
That's acceptable.
When we look at Dominique Youx, we are looking at a man who stood at the crossroads of the age. The French Revolution, the Caribbean world, the Louisiana Purchase, the War of 1812, New Orleans politics, and American myth-making.
And all of that in one life.
One very busy life.
He is the kind of figure who makes history feel alive, because he reminds us that the past was not orderly. It was improvised. It was muddy. It smelled like gunpowder and river water. It involved people making choices under pressure, sometimes for principle, sometimes for survival, and sometimes because the alternative was a prison cell.
And sometimes all three at once.
Exactly.
So next time someone brings up the Battle of New Orleans and mentions Andrew Jackson or Jean Lafitte, you can say, yes, but let me tell you about Dominique Youx.
And then prepare for everyone at the table to either be fascinated or trapped.
That's our brand.
History facts they cannot escape.
Before we sail out of Barataria Bay, we want to give special thanks to all of our listeners. You keep this show growing, you send us great topic ideas, and you make it possible for us to keep exploring stories like this one.
Please rate the podcast, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves history, pirates, New Orleans, military stories, or complicated people with excellent canon skills.
And remember, a 5-star review really helps the podcast grow. It tells the platforms that the History AI podcast is worth recommending, and it helps new listeners find these evergreen episodes.
Evergreen means these stories stay relevant. You can come back anytime, re-listen, share them, or use them to win an argument at dinner.
Preferably a friendly argument.
Preferably.
Send us your topic suggestions on social media. We do read them, and your idea might become a future episode. And don't forget to check out the new merchandise through the link in the show notes.
Grab a shirt, a mug, or whatever makes you feel historically powerful.
For the History AI podcast, I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco.
And remember, history is never really gone.
Sometimes it's just hiding in a bayou with a cannon.
We'll see you next time.
Salt upon his name. Nobody knows just where he came from, but the ocean knew his fame. A sailor with a loaded gun, a smuggler in the night. He chased the wind across the waves where fortune favored fight. They whispered tales in tavern halls the cannon smoke burning and the Gulf at your side. From a pirate's deck to a battlefield, you stood your ground and you refused to yield. History fades, but the stories remain of the pirate who fought through fire and flame. Oh, Dominique, the waves still call your name. With Jean Lafitte in the hidden bays, they ran their ships through the morning haze. Golden goods from across the sea, living by their own decree. Then the British came knocking with a promise in hand. Turn against New Orleans, betray your own land. But the pirates chose a different road and carried the young republic's load. Yesterday's outlaw, tomorrow's friend. Sometimes the lines begin to bend. A cannon doesn't ask who you used to be when you're fighting for a city's destiny. Oh, Dominique, ride the rolling tide with the cannon smoke burning and the Gulf at your side. From a pirate's deck to a battlefield, you stood your ground and you refused to yield. History fades, but the stories remain of the pirate who fought through fire and flame. Oh, Dominique, the waves still call your name. Ha, ha. On the plains of Chalmette, the thunder rolled, the pirate's heart and the soldier's soul. Cannons roared and the redcoats fell. New Orleans lived with a story to tell. Not every hero wears a golden crown. Some rise from places, others look down. From smuggler's shore to history's page, a pirate became a hero that day. Oh, Dominique, ride the rolling tide with the ghosts of the Gulf forever by your side. Raise your glass where the bay waters run for the pirate who stood behind Jackson's guns. The ocean remembers, the legends remain. The storm and the sailor, the fire and the flame. Oh, Dominique, the waves still call your name. So some men chase treasure, some men chase fame. Some leave the world remembering their name. Out past Barataria, where the old winds blow, the pirate still sails where the Gulf tides go.